Fragments of Truth by Ingalese explores the spiritual, mystical, and unseen dimensions of existence, suggesting that truths beyond the physical realm can illuminate our understanding of life, consciousness, and the universe. Welcome, I am Daisy, your hostess. You're joining me for this 4-part read of Fragments of Truth, as the author attempts to address many phenomena such as psychic abilities, miracles, vibrations, and other mysterious aspects of reality. And as the author so appropriately titled it, Fragments of Truth, I invite you to contemplate on the idea of how much truth lies within the many fragments of stories in your life. Even the stories you tell yourself and the story you play out in your daily life. There is a moment in the book where the author talks about truth and also the implications of half-truths, which is nothing more than a lie shrouded in a spark of the light of truth. And this carries with it the weight of deception, the weight of manipulation, the intent of creating a delay or obfuscation, which inevitably, as the author mentioned, this nature is designed in such a way that when the timing is right, all truths do get revealed. This is all-pervading consciousness woven in the principles of nature, and it has no prejudice towards good or bad. It simply operates in a forward movement of growth with moments of destruction. And it's interesting because we can't say that is not true, because we've seen how nature comes in with a volcano, with an earthquake, with a tsunami. And after that destruction comes what? The period of regrowth into what? Something better. So these are principles that are woven into this whole thing called the Matrix. And at the end of the day, what is this thing? It's something that's perpetually moving forward towards that progress, towards that grand evolution, something that seems to be ineffable, right? So in this video, we will explore the nature of extrasensory perception, telepathy, clairvoyance, and other extraordinary mental abilities. Any person can take a look at history and see how far we've come by simply looking at how many branches of the sciences we have now evolved from man's curiosity about his world. And despite our advancement in the various fields of science, there is still so many unanswered questions, especially in the fields of pseudosciences and psych exploration. And perhaps I'm not the only one noticing a resurgence of serious inquiries of mind and psyche phenomena. Surely there must be something in it, because even the MK Ultra, which was said to be an illegal human experiment program designed and undertaken by the U.S. Central Agency with the CIA, they were looking and delving into these different phenomena. And through the ages, there have been mystics, priests, and esoteric philosophers that have tapped into the fringes of these mysteries. And there must be something when there are many documented first-hand experiences of psychic phenomena that science still has not been able to provide an explanation to, and for lack of empirical evidence, hence research, we yet have not arrived at these scientific explanations, the theories, the formulas, So for those with eyes to see and ears to hear, much of what the authors are going to reveal is simply another layer and confirmation of what you know. And for those that are new to this topic, this information may help in providing new perspectives from seeing the world through myopic lens and shifting to a more visionary and hyperopic lens, as the author offers, through a combination of historical accounts, scientific investigations, and personal anecdotes. And these are evidence supporting the existence of such phenomena that allows us to question the boundaries of human perception and to contemplate the profound possibilities that lie beyond the limits of what is known. So I do look forward to your thoughts and comments. Enjoy as I now turn the page. Fragments of Truth by Richard Ingalese and Isabella Ingalese. Dedication to those faithful students who are living the teachings of occultism is this book dedicated. Chapter 1. Psychic Phenomena. Phenomenon challenges man's curiosity even when it does not permanently hold its interest, and death has always been the chief phenomenon of his observation. From time when the first mother gazed through her misty eyes of tears at the dead body of her child, and sought to follow into the silence and darkness the animating principle which had made that body so dear to her, man has fitfully tried to penetrate the misty veil in order to ascertain what has become of the unwilling pioneer of the shadow world. At all times, some souls have sought to solve the mystery of life and death, and to prove if there is anything in man that persists after the body becomes cold and dumb. Both profane and sacred history record that, in every period, some thinkers have believed in the immortality of man, and have endeavored to keep in touch with those who died. While the priesthood has never sought to discourage or prohibit this public practice, to the inquiring mind this would seem a strange position for priestcraft to assume, since any discovery would tend to support the contention of the priests. Therefore, a thinker must conclude that such investigations would either ultimately destroy the religious orders, or that the priesthood had esoteric knowledge on the subject that proved the practice inimical to the investigator. The occultist says there is truth in both alternatives. Old wine in new bottles. Psychic phenomena is the rechristened lesser magic of the ancients, a phase of the power of mind as old as humanity. By magic is meant, of course, the control of certain natural forces through a knowledge of their laws, and not the tricks of legerdemain. In its modern aspect, it does not delve as deeply into the soul power, nor cover as wide a range in expression as did the ancient temple magic or medieval ceremonial magic. This is due to the fact that people have largely neglected the study of the lower aspects of occultism, as well as the higher, during the last 1,000 years, the second half of the Piscean Age. During this period, man has been more interested in the objective, the material, than in the subjective. There have been times, however, when his attention has diverted temporarily, and he has turned wonderingly to examine his own inner nature and its relationship to the evolutionary plan. Modern psychic phenomenon, like ancient Jewish psychism, is largely, though not exclusively, confined to necromancy, but with this difference. At present, either the Ouija board or automatic writing often takes the place of a medium, for there is a distinct tendency in this age to individualization and to acquire knowledge without the intervention of intermediaries. Necromancy, however, is always the same in the results, whether it be produced through a medium, as in spiritism, by the help of an Ouija board, as in modern parlor pastime, or as practiced in ancient demonism, or through blood sacrifices, as in voodooism and in devil worship. Broadly speaking, modern psychic phenomenon of this class is embraced in 5 general groups of manifestation. First, inspirational writing and speaking. Second, visions, premonitions, phantoms, and phantasms. Third, clairvoyance and clairaudience, yoga and crystal gazing. Fourth, psychic healing. Fifth, physical phenomena. In discussing a topic of this kind with the general public, a student of occultism is somewhat perplexed how to proceed because of the infinite complexity of the subject. The grossly materialistic, the mercenary religionist, and the credulous creedman will, perforce, deny the actuality of the phenomena. It is therefore useless to waste effort in those directions. The reader, the thinker, the investigator must acknowledge the facts of the phenomena, even though they may doubt the various explanations given to account for them. The divergence of opinions has greatly narrowed during the last 50 years, until there may be said to be but 3 remaining explanations, namely fraud, spiritism, and occultism. It is admitted by all investigators that fraud runs through much of the phenomena, but it is equally true that there is a residuum wherein neither conscious nor unconscious fraud exists, and this becomes more and more evident as the accumulation of evidence multiplies. The chief differences in opinion between the progressed spiritists and the occultists are these. The latter maintains that some phenomena are produced by intelligences less than man, under man's direction, some by the subjective mind, either of the medium or of the investigator, or of both cooperating, while still other manifestations are by incarnated egos who temporarily and voluntarily operate at times out of their physical bodies for the purpose of producing such phenomena. This was particularly true in the third quarter of the 19th century. Then materialism was aggressive and theology was rapidly being destroyed by facts, and with it much of the innate religious convictions of man. To counteract this, some of the religious occult brotherhoods, notably those which are the souls of Buddhism and of Brahmanism, respectively, as the Society of Jesus is the soul of Catholicism, resolved to use their knowledge of magic for the purpose of awakening an interest in matters pertaining to spirit. Some of those occultists, therefore, attended subjectively test seances, especially those in which learned Occidental scientists were interested, and there produced a higher and a more marvelous class of phenomena than is usually now seen. This was convincing to many of the investigators, and thus an impetus was given to Spiritism, which is destined to aid in destroying materialism. It is true that through their investigations many individuals have suffered and others will have cause to suffer, but the movement was not originated, merely accelerated by the occultists referred to, on the theory that a legitimate end justifies the means, a proposition which does not meet with the approval of all esotericists. All psychic phenomenon is produced through the control of certain natural forces, whether the producer be an occultist, an excarnated man, or an elemental. The law, of course, is the same and is sometimes used by evil entities selfishly and malignantly, often by practical jokers, mischievously, for death does not change the nature of a man, and still more often by the mentally vainglorious who desire to be worshipped and to direct the affairs of others, as so many do while incarnated, and occasionally by occultists for an unselfish and higher purpose as narrated. If one is resolved to make a personal investigation of these dangerous matters, it is well to heed St. Paul's warning and try the spirits. One is at liberty also to investigate whether or not arsenic destroys life. Some persons have found that in small quantities it does not, in larger quantities it does. That some forms of life, human or otherwise, resist the poison better than others. One may adopt the conclusions of scientific investigators in either of the cases cited, or follow the satiety, the rounds of phenomena and of experimentation. It does not require a highly trained intelligence to produce phenomena in modern spiritism. The essential element is passivity, the yielding of one's body, brain, and mind to any chance intelligence who cares to manifest through those center. The word mediumship connotes a higher or a stronger control. The medium, having temporarily yielded his body to another entity, is seldom in a position to observe the phenomena produced through it, and therefore personally can learn little through such an experience. Investigators can, through physical observation, watch the phenomena of obsession, but cannot actually know the method by which it is accomplished, nor the identity of the operator, unless the investigator himself has clairvoyant powers to observe, on the subjective side of life, the operating entity and his procedure. Therefore, the investigation of psychic phenomena by either mediums or non-clairvoyant investigators is unreliable and unsatisfactory. It is true that the medium may excite the wonderment or the admiration of some people through the display of his easily acquired powers, or make a precarious living in that matter, or give temporary comfort to those who receive messages from real or pretended departed friends, And if any of these is the motive for mediumship, then no one has the right to question it. But if the effort is to obtain facts, ultimate truth, a better way must be found. It may not be out of place to give a word of caution to persons now contemplating entering upon mediumship. In the vast majority of cases in which genuine phenomena is produced, is found a rapid impairment of the body and of the intelligence of the medium, and the greater the phenomena produced, the quicker the deterioration. Nor is physical injury the only thing to be feared, for often with the bodily havoc there is an equal moral degeneration. The reason for this is not hard to understand when it is learned how phenomena is produced. The law of psychic phenomena, as observed from the occult side, is phenomenon is produced by the self-directed magnetism of the operator acting upon the tactile magnetism of the body or thing through which the phenomena occurs. The human interacted ego has a physical body which it moves at will. The ego is a more intangible entity than its body. How, then, can it control its physical counterpart? The occultist answers through the red corpuscles or magnetic portion of the blood. The magnetic force of the ego, acting upon the magnetism of the blood, forces the blood magnetism over selected nerves, causing them to automatically act upon the muscles, and these in turn upon the bones and flesh. Thus, an arm is raised or lowered. Again, apply this law to moving a table. The particles composing that piece of furniture are held together by the magnetism that is inherent in the atoms composing the wood. If the wood were completely demagnetized, disintegration would take place and the table would crumble into finest powder. The man not only controls his own magnetism, arm and hand, but also the tractable magnetism of the atoms of the table, and thus there is exerted magnetic and mechanical force, controlled by mind or will. When the ego loses or lays down its physical vehicle, it is still an intangible magnetic entity and uses the same law in producing physical phenomena. If it desires to move a table and is strong enough to do so, for there is a difference in mental strength between egos, both incarnated and excarnated, it uses its own magnetism to control the magnetism of the atoms of the table, causing it to move. If the excarnated ego has a medium to use in the experiment, it uses the body of the medium in the same manner as it formerly used its own. Or the excarnated ego, not being sufficiently strong in itself, may draw upon the magnetism of the medium and of any negative investigators present, and by the absorption of such extraneous magnetism acquire sufficient force to move the table. It is this constant vampirization of the magnetism of the medium which depletes his body, and it is the lack of magnetism in the medium which prompts him to resort to fraud when unable to furnish the obsessing entity the requisite force to produce the phenomena. This explains why different persons get different results from the same medium at various times, as witness Slade, Palladino, and host of others. The investigator is not without danger also, though to a less degree than the medium. A trained, positive mind is seldom influenced at the beginning of such investigations. It will be on guard and naturally critical, as scientific agnosticism generally is. As long as it remains positive, it is comparatively safe. But no mind, at this period of our evolution, is continually positive. Business complications, family cares, overwork, sickness, or indisposition all interact on mind and body and produce or intensify negativeness. When negative, even a strong mind is vulnerable by psychic forces. For, be it remembered, the influence of the seance room does not cease with the closing of its doors. The entities which are attracted to a center of that kind will attach themselves to an investigator and seek to influence him in his own home or elsewhere and await their opportunity in that regard. For this reason, almost all investigators are, in a measure, sooner or later affected by the influences they study. This is noticeable even with leading scientists and trained minds who, after years of research along these lines, accept evidence as conclusive, which, in the beginning of their investigations, they would have entirely rejected, evidence which, in their professional work, they would exclude. Under the influences brought to bear upon them by the disembodied entities, their minds seem to lose discerning power and the relationship between cause and effect. And this should not be a cause of wonderment to those who have given any attention to the power of suggestion. An ego loses nothing of its mental power by giving up its body. It can therefore mentally suggest to another ego, either in or out of a physical body. A constantly repeated suggestion is like the dripping of water on a stone. It wears out opposition, and in time, the suggestion is accepted wholly or in part. Fortunately for humanity, all disembodied spirits are not malignant. They are like humanity, as we see it in daily life, minus their physical bodies. Therefore, they are actuated by ordinary human impulses and must be judged solely from this viewpoint. For example, a propagandist is a fanatic, whether incarnated or excarnated. If he were a spiritist in earth life, he would naturally continue persistently in his work after death. If he could convince a noted scientist, writer, speaker, or statesman, he would spare no effort to accomplish his purpose, because through such a convert, many other proselytes would be made to his cause. On the subjective plane, there are good, bad, and indifferent entities, and no one can foretell the character of the mind one may contact during psychic investigation. It is not in accordance with experience in such matters to say that each mind will attract to itself only such minds as are in consonance with its own character. The insane asylums are filled with negatively good people who adorned family and social life before they were obsessed. Nor is it to be understood that, in all such cases, their insanity was produced through the study of psychism. Negative persons are always in danger of psychic influences, but are more apt to escape them if they ignore that realm than if they voluntarily intrude upon it. It is true that minds of similar natures are attracted to each other on the subjective, the objective, and interblended planes. And while our friends in physical life may be similar in a measure to ourselves, yet it is also true that we sometimes suffer from undesired contact with criminals, and the same is true in the astral world. In neither of the cases cited do we know of the danger until after the damage is done. Possession and obsession are but varying degrees of the same condition, the partial or complete control of one mind or body by another mind. And it may be interesting, viewed from the subjective side of life, to see how this is accomplished. The obsessing entity approaches its victim and studies his character, which is indicated by the victim's aura and the pictures contained therein. The obsessor works upon the victim's weaknesses. If one of those weaknesses is vanity, then it flatters him and tells the victim what a great ego he is and how he has been selected to be a messenger to the people, to teach new and greater truths to the world. Or if love is his vulnerable side, then the victim's love nature is appealed to, and the obsessor poses as a child, a parent, or a lover, and through the victim's human emotions wins his confidence. The message may be conveyed to the victim through a medium, Ouija board, or through mental suggestion, but slowly, as the snake approaches the charmed bird, the obsessor draws nearer to its victim until, at length, the two auras blend. Little by little, the victim's hand and arm may be controlled, as in automatic writing, until soon, if the practice is persisted in, the mind, will, and body of the victim comes under the dominion of the obsessor to do with as it wills. Then, when the obsessor desires to use the body of its victim, it overpowers and crowds out the ego and usurps his rightful place. Commencing as subjective hypnotism, it ends too frequently in insanity. Obsession may be guarded against by observing a few common sense rules. First, never undertake psychic investigation until duly equipped for the work. The proper method of preparation will be given later. Second, cultivate a positive mental attitude at all times. This does not mean to be aggressive, but to have a calm reserve and watchfulness of all mental processes. Never drift mentally, but consciously direct the mind along any selected line of thought. In other words, practice concentration at all times. Third, learn to practice self-control, and then no one else can ever control you. Fourth, put aside the fear of being controlled and never doubt your own ability to protect yourself. Fear lowers the vibration of one's aura and renders one more negative. The investigation of psychic phenomena has not produced unalloyed evil. Pioneers always pay price of leadership, while those who follow reap the benefits. During the last 50 years, humanity as a whole has benefited through the investigation of psychism, for, by an overwhelming preponderance of evidence, it has been established that the human personality survives bodily death. And while this does not prove immortality, it lays the foundation for it. It is only logical to infer that if the mind persists independently of the body, even for a brief time, then, unless some other cause intervenes, it may persist indefinitely. And this is in perfect accord with occult philosophy, which teaches that as long as man, by conscious effort, seeks evolvement, he will be immortal, and that only devolvement or stagnation will destroy his identity. A further benefit has come to the Occident through the investigation of psychic phenomena, and that is the removal of the fear of death. The old theology of the West painted death so horribly and so forbiddingly described an inane heaven and a gruesome hell that both the transition and the post-mortem states of existence filled one with fear. Man is prone to believe that which he desires to believe, and many men gladly accepted the alternative view of the materialist, that death was annihilation. But now the Occident begins to know what the occultist has always known, that death is but a change of consciousness, a passing from a denser into a finer form of matter. There is undoubtedly much of value to be learned from the proper study of psychism, but so far the results seem negligibly small compared with the effort and the cost, not only during the last 70 years, but through all the weary centuries of man's evolution on this planet, for we are still but tasting the old wine from new bottles. Physicists have carefully investigated modern necromancy, but have any new laws of physics been revealed to or through them? Chemists have investigated, but has the world been enriched through new facts revealed to them by subjective entities? In turn, all the learned professions, arts, and sciences have furnished votaries to the cult, but the spirits have added but little to the store of human knowledge. Why? We have collected an amazing mass of platitudes and of chatter, but no substantial revelations. Why? Is it because man becomes less intelligent as he gains experiences and broadens his vision? That is not in accordance with past observations. The channel of communication between the two worlds seems to be open, and no prohibition seems placed on spirits to speak either wisely or foolishly. In the absence of any other satisfactory answer to these questions, may we not accept as a possible explanation the teachings of occultism on this subject? Occultists say that when a man dies, he is drawn by gravic force to that state, plane, or subjective world corresponding to his general vibration or character. That the less developed characters and intelligences are therefore earthbound, because the first subjective plane is denser than the others. The more highly developed man, therefore, quickly passes through this first subjective plane to other and better states, leaving the undeveloped man and angel guides to contact this world of ours and to blindly lead the blind. Is it not possible then to reach higher intelligences, to contact finer inner worlds, and to gain valuable information? The occultist would answer, yes. There is always a proper and an improper way of doing everything, and there is a successful and an unsuccessful method of studying psychism, of investigating psychic phenomena. There has always been a higher and a lower occultism, a greater and a lesser magic. Aaron had studied this subject well and did not hesitate to compete with the Egyptian magicians of Pharaoh's court, and by reason of this greater knowledge overpowered them. By the study of occultism, the occult may be mastered. All explorers who go into an unknown country first seek to learn what they can about that country, and particularly the dangers to be encountered there. Then, protecting themselves as best they can, and having made all provisions that foresight may suggest, they enter upon their quest. A like procedure is a sensible one in the study of psychism, or lesser magic, but probably the unwise will in the future, as in the past, rush in where the wiser ones cautiously tread. Before a student of occultism enters upon an investigation of necromancy and of other branches of lesser magic, for there are other branches, he first studies the art of concentration. Having the theory well fixed in his mind, he commences the practice of specialized concentration upon the free cosmic forces which surround him, particularly the positive force of cosmic blue. The correct shade of this color can be seen in the current leaping from pole to pole in a static machine, or where the trolley makes an imperfect contact with the wire. As has been shown more fully in the history and power of mind, concentrating upon a cosmic force draws that force into the human aura. If the force is of higher vibration than the aura, it will raise the vibration of the aura to its own rate. No malignant or ignorant entity ever vibrates as high as the color mentioned. Therefore, it would be as impossible for an entity to obsess a person whose aura vibrates that color as it would be for glass to cut a diamond. For the higher vibration repels the lower, and even Paul became blind in the presence of an angelic being. The student whose aura is normally vibrating electric blue is not only invulnerable to psychic influences, but is prepared to contact the higher planes of the inner life, which correspond to that color by reason of synchronous vibrations. The next step for the student is to develop independent clairvoyance and clairaudience by concentrating upon the electric blue force before mentioned, and later upon the yellow cosmic force. When these forces are condensed in the two ganglia of the brain, known respectively as the pineal gland and the pituitary body, the vibration of these ganglia is raised until they function as inner vision and inner hearing. Having acquired the ability to see the inner worlds, the student now looks down upon the first subjective plane and studies the psychic forces there are at work, much as a person looks down from an upper window on the street below and watches the madding crowd. Stepping behind the scenes and looking through the eyes of the student of occultism at the actors, producers of psychic phenomena, and their work, the first thing that impresses one is the seeming inextricable blending of truth and falsehood. A total falsehood soon dies, though it may cause much destruction and sorrow during its brief life, but a lie, which is half a truth, gains power and vitality by reason of its truthful element, and therefore its life is longer and more dangerous. The lowest associated with Spiritism is composed of tricksters who pose as mediums and, through sleight of hand or mechanical contrivances, beguile the untrained investigator until they are self-exposed by carelessness or crude effort, or are exposed by a careful observer. These imitations of mediums bring derision to the movement, which they misrepresent, and but little profit to themselves, since they are soon driven out of town as common frauds by the authorities, and, becoming compulsive itinerants, never again acquire a serious following. The next class are real mediums who are constantly or intermittently controlled by disembodied entities. But here again truth and falsehood blend, for many mediums, abandon their former controls or unable for a time through physical depletion to furnish the controlling entity with the requisite magnetism, resort to fraud to hold their followers. This is so confusing to the non-clairvoyant investigator who is attracted by the actual phenomena and repelled by the fraud, that he often abandons the entire study in disgust. Many controls are what they claim to be: Indians, criminals, and animalized men and women without physical bodies. Some are of the ordinary run of humanity who have never progressed much along intellectual or ethical lines in their late lives. Others are materialists who are earthbound because of their mode of thought, but help to compose that motley throng who cannot rise to higher planes and are contented with using the minds and bodies of those left on earth. Occasionally, there are sincere souls who unwisely seek to use a medium to send comfort to the dear ones left behind. But whenever this effort is made, it is usually followed later by messages from impersonators with ulterior motives. And last and worst of all are the various grades of devolving egos, those who are hopelessly depraved and destructive, who are on the downward path to annihilation, for all destructive centers, sooner or later, destroy themselves. When watching the kinds of phenomena produced, one is again confronted by the real and the imitation, the true, the false, and the compounding of the two. And this is particularly the case during the examination of the first four of the enumerated classes. Inspirational writing and speaking belong to the highest order of psychic phenomena, because they blend into true inspiration, and here the line of distinction sometimes becomes very thin. In these cases, the intelligence of the medium must cooperate with a secondary intelligence, not necessarily that of a spirit or of an individual, for in true inspiration, a connection between the medium and the universal consciousness may be made. Most of the sacred writings have come to the world in this way, and therefore are called inspired. Someone keenly sensitive along spiritual lines receives from divine consciousness, God, certain ideas, or sometimes words, and these are transmitted to others through speech or writing. And this, in a lesser degree, is true of all the greatest writers of the world. They are people who have not necessarily received their ideas from other intelligences, but who have been able to attach themselves subconsciously to the universal consciousness and to receive from it ideas, phrases, and sometimes whole treatises. For example, Tennyson said that sometimes couplets came to him complete, and all that he did was to commit to paper that which floated into his mind from the ether. And was it not Byron who said, "I lisped in numbers, for the numbers came"? This does not necessarily mean that those poets were communicating with spirits. It was more probable that their subconscious minds were connected with the literary current in the universal consciousness, and through it received an inflow of ideas. And their minds being rhythmical, they expressed those ideas in poetry. This kind of inspiration is much more rare than are cases in which the secondary intelligence is that of an individual. It would not be fair to discuss psychic phenomena unless this aspect were included in the discussion, though, strictly speaking, it belongs to higher magic or occultism. The mere mention of it as a possibility opens the door to subsequent imposition. So excarnated entities, spirits, may try to pose as deity and impose upon sensitives who are experimenting along the line indicated. But there is a safeguard for the student, even though he be not an independent clairvoyant. In true inspiration, there never is a magnetic or psychic control, either mental or physical. True inspiration is, as the root word indicate, a breathing in, an absorption of ideas, expressions, or both, and there is no danger of obsession, but instead a great benefit and uplift is given to the speaker or writer who is able to consciously tap cosmic consciousness, for his source of supply. And it should be clearly understood that the tapping process is done through concentration, effort, and intellectual preparation. It is not a gift of God to be bestowed upon passive, negative, ignorant individuals. There is no royal road to inspiration, learning, and success. In Spiritism, the large majority of inspirational writers and speakers do not derive their power from cosmic consciousness through their own effort, but passively receive it from excarnated minds. And this invariably leads to a lower form of mediumship on the one hand and to possession or obsession on the other. When the obsessing entity desires to use the hand and arm of its victim for automatic writing, it merely crowds out the medium's ego from that portion of his body and substitutes its own magnetic member in the vacated physical arm and hand of its victim. And after enveloping the body and brain of the now passive medium with its own magnetism, it writes whatsoever it will, using the borrowed member of its victim as if it were its own. With the lower order of so-called inspirational speaking, it is somewhat different. Here it is sometimes possession and sometimes obsession. When obsession, the guide, surrounds or envelops the mind and body of the medium and impresses such thoughts and language as it wishes to convey, while in obsession the mind or ego of the medium is entirely forced out of his body and the obsessor, entering it, uses it temporarily, speaking through it as though it were its own. But there is a unique group of cases which is constantly enlarging, where inspiration is self-engendered. The subjective mind of man has potencies and potentialities far beyond any powers active or latent of the objective mind. As man develops, his subjective self comes more and more into evidence, and when he has gained self-mastery or dominion of the objective self, he uses his illimitable storehouse of memory and of knowledge along any desired line. At this point, in the race development, we sometimes see fitful evidences of the awakening of subjective minds. As a source of inspiration in speaking, it usually manifests by impressing its objective mind with the expressive word, apt illustration, or correct explanation in such a manner that often the speaker and his audience realize that he built it better than he knew. In writing, the subjective mind, at times, impresses upon its objective self entire plays, poems, and stories. Characters seem to float into objective consciousness not as mental creations but as actual human beings. And here again, let it be noted, as a test of this aspect of psychological power, there is never attached any extraneous magnetic or psychic control, either mental or physical. In the second enumerated group of phenomena, visions, premonitions, phantoms, and phantasms, is another bewildering mixture of mental auto-activity and induced activity, the source of which is varied. Again, reverting to the subjective mind, it is found that it plays no small part in premonitions and in visions. Coming events, both good and evil, cast their shadows before because they are largely self-created and are psychically attached to their creators. Having originated on the mental plane, the subjective self becomes conscious of them as they approach materialization. Sometimes the subjective mind succeeds in implanting in its objective mind a picture of an approaching event. Sometimes it is merely an impression, more often merely an unformulated idea, or is more popularly known a hunch. Divine consciousness at times, in a man's tranquil moments and often when he is passing from or into sleep, impresses him with a prophetic knowledge of matters which affect him directly or indirectly. These impressions may or may not be in pictures and are never accompanied by spirit control. In both classes of cases mentioned, the vision or the premonition nearly always becomes an actuality in time. And the more carefully men adapt their lives to this source of information, the greater will become their receptivity to further knowledge. The denizens of the deceptive realm also produce a large number of visions and premonitions which beguile, afflict, or entertain psychic investigators, sensitives, psychics, and ultra-passive or negative individuals. Through telepathy, the excarnated entity implants pictures or impressions upon the unresisting mind of its victim. In fact, it is often by such means that one's attention is at first attracted and later held by such pictures or thoughts, and this is but one of the many devices used by the astral charmer. The more frequent the practice, the weaker becomes the will of the victim, and the stronger the power of the obsessor. It is needless to add that such visions and premonitory impressions are uncertain, depending upon the good or bad judgment and the actual information of the entity who produces them. If a phantom is understood to be a fancied vision, an unreality, a thought picture, then the sources of phantoms are many. The astral world, the first subjective plane, is a limitless picture gallery. In it are all the photographs of the acts of men. These pictures float into the vision of the sensitive, the negative, and the developing psychic, and are largely useless time killers. To indulge in this form of astral moving pictures is but to encourage greater passivity and to throw open wider the doors to psychic influences of the mediumship sort. These influences are not slow in taking advantage of such opportunities and soon commence to implant, through their power of suggestion, their own thought pictures into the minds of such sensitives, changing the curious investigator into a conscious or perhaps an unconscious medium. There are also phantoms which are the pictures of each man's individual past, photographed in his own photosphere or aura. When he can, through concentration and conscious effort, recall these phantoms, he can connect his present with his past and wisely build his future. It is only an independent and trained clairvoyant who can always distinguish between a phantom and a phantasm. Among occultists, the word phantasm has grown to mean an apparition, a subjective entity, an ego without its body, and applies to certain abnormal conditions of the living as well as the dead. The most frequent cases met with are those of persons who have just died or who have died recently. The reason for this is that the excarnated ego stands, as it were, in the doorway between the two worlds and functions in a measure in both. Until disintegration of the body has progressed to where the form has largely disappeared, the soul or ego is magnetically attached to it and can, if mentally strong, draw upon the magnetism of its body and so clothe itself with electrical invisibles as to appear to a psychic or to a normal person abnormally passive at the moment. This phenomenon may best be understood when it is remembered that the human body is composed of electrical invisibles, and when enough of them are condensed and arranged together, the human form is produced. Originally, the incarnating ego, being a magnetic center, draws the electrical invisibles from its mother's blood, and it is thus that the embryo and finally the fetus are formed. After death, as the decomposing body liberates these electrical invisibles, they can be magnetically attracted temporarily by the ego and masked so as to be sensed or seen upon the physical plane. As a rough illustration, suppose a ray of sunlight were permitted to enter a dark room. The slowly floating particles of dust in the room are invisible until the ray of light enters. Then, the quickening vibration of the light draws and condenses the unseen particles, and they move more rapidly until the ray of light is clothed with myriads of vibrating particles. Sometimes an incarnated ego, burning with the desire to see a loved one or to convey a message, unconsciously slips from his body and, clothed with its magnetic particles, is able to appear to that one at a distant place. And what is done unconsciously by the uninstructed ego is consciously done by a student of occultism with his own mind and body, and may be done by a denizen of the psychic realm whose body has long been disintegrated by vampirizing a medium or by drawing upon the magnetism of the person it obsesses. Such a denizen may thus produce sufficient magnetism invisibles to materialize and to appear to the living for some sinister motive of its own. And because the magnetic form is but temporary and can be shaped at will, an angel guide is able to mask as a friend or relative and to deceive anyone unless that one should be an independent clairvoyant. Because certain occultists during the last quarter of the 19th century were accustomed to visit in their thought bodies some of their students, later these spirit controls imitated the adepts and imposed upon some of the less developed students. By working on their vanity, these astral impostors directed those students to found scores of occult brotherhoods, secret orders, and Hindu cults. Under the guidance of their directors, those students filched ancient, honorable names for their bogus organizations and deceived hundreds of honest seekers after occult truths. A teacher of higher occultism is never found in the astral deception realm, and those who believe otherwise will eventually find themselves in another form of spiritism. In the third class of psychic phenomena are clairvoyance and clairaudience, and here again are to be found sunshine and shadow, the real and the imitation. Sometimes these powers develop in normal evolution as a man grows in character, knowledge, and force, and it is just in accordance with a man's rate of vibration that these powers develop and manifest. Some persons are able to see and hear only the first subjective or psychic plane, while others are able to see on all the higher planes connected with this planet. It will be observed that here the action is personal and the functioning is due entirely to the will of the ego. He opens and shuts his inner vision as he opens and shuts his physical eyes. In such cases as these, the vision is clear and accurate. But there is also a false clairvoyance induced by the intervention of another's will or through mechanical processes, and both lead to the same results, the impressing of another's thoughts upon the mind of the experimentalist. This false clairvoyance is illustrated first in mesmerism and hypnotism. The operator, whether he be incarnated or excarnated, puts his subject into an artificial sleep and induces an abnormal state of consciousness. This is not true clairvoyance because the subject does not function through his own volition. During an artificial sleep of this kind, the operator may force the subjective mind of his subject from its body and send it to any point or place upon the earth. And while the subjective and objective minds of the subject are thus separated, the subjective mind wirelesses to its objective mind such messages and describes such scenes as the operator desires or suggests. And the objective mind of the subject, who is still in its body, repeats the messages from its subjective mind to the operator. Then there is an artificial sleep produced through what is called self-induced hypnosis. This is when an experimentalist, through the use of a crystal or revolving discs or a brilliant object suspended before his eyes, produces a self-induced sleep. While in this abnormal condition, the body and brain of the experimentalist becomes an easy prey to any passing entity who may choose to use it, and the scenes that he describes and the messages he may give while under this influence are entirely undependable and perhaps absolutely false. A third method of producing unnatural or false clairvoyance is through yoga practices, which bring about physical and psychical disturbances. This is done by changing the polarity of the brain and reversing the natural circulation of the blood. Here again, there is a lower psychical power developed, which is more or less under the control of the experimentalist. But it is also true that this practice opens the way for other entities to enter and control the unhappy victim, as has been seen in innumerable cases of the practitioners of that art in America. In the fourth class of cases, again, there is the usual admixture of the higher and the lower magic. This is called psychic healing. The occultist says Such healing comes either from divine mind as an automatic response to the intense and continued desire or demand for health from the invalid, or from some conscious expert manipulator of the cosmic currents. In rare cases, they may be directed by a higher, disembodied intelligence from the upper interior planes of being. It is true, however, that the denizens of the deceptive realm sometimes, by the power of suggestion, cure imaginary diseases, but they usually exact, as an unmentioned price for their services, the right to direct or control that individual in the future. The fifth class of cases, physical phenomena and trance mediumship, is usually psychism of the lowest order, for here the operators are generally earthbound spirits. Trumpet sounding, table tipping, slate writing, fortune telling, messages, materialization, etc. are produced by astral entities using the body and the magnetism of the medium or of those combined with the collective magnetism of the investigators present. There are rare cases, however, where such phenomena may be duplicated by an embodied occultist using elements for his purpose. But no person, unless affected by psychic influences, could imagine a higher intelligence condescending to indulge in such astral legerdemain and horseplay as are seen in many seances. In the case of messages, they are both unreliable as to source and undependable as to fact. It is true that in some of these so-called test messages, facts supposed to be known only to the investigator and to the excarnated person are sometimes given to prove the identity of the sender of the message. But this is not necessarily conclusive evidence, because the communicating, disembodied entity can read in the subjective mind of the investigator the facts it is narrating to prove its identity. The subjective mind is the abode of permanent memory. All experiences, all impressions, all thoughts are photographed therein. A circumstance may pass from out of the conscious memory of the objective mind, but remains a subconscious picture within the higher mind. So the apparent test is no test at all, and the only reason people are impressed with such phenomena is because they have not studied psychology. A little knowledge of occult philosophy would soon reveal the apparently marvelous messages and psychic phenomena to be very ordinary but dangerous psychic intoxication. Old wine in new bottles. Is it not almost time for a voluntary psychic prohibition movement? End of chapter. Chapter 2. Miracles. The Christian nations are, or were, until comparatively recent times, accustomed to think of miracles as the production of phenomena by supernatural means. This view was due, doubtless, to two causes. First, that the majority of people were ignorant of the cause of the phenomena, which we call miracles, and second, our teachers, the priests, to give additional glory to the founder of their religion, were accustomed to teach that his acts were above nature, and that he was superior to his creations, and could set at naught nature's laws whenever he willed to do so. But those who are more widely read, those who have studied comparative religions, those who know the lives of the occultists of the past, realize that miracles did not commence with Jesus of Nazareth, nor will they end with the Christian Church. The Orthodox churches, as well as the Christian Scientist and kindred cults of the present day, assume that miracles now, as in the past, are produced by supernatural means, that is to say, through or by God, and that he destroys disease, performs cures, and works other miracles. This is but a repetition of the old medieval and post-medieval thought, taking a slightly different form, and is almost as erroneous as was the agnostic who, when asked to define a miracle, said, "It is an unusual phenomena which never occurred." The Oriental view of a miracle is that it is the production of phenomena by superhuman means, the distinction being drawn between supernatural and superhuman. Some of the modern students of occultism adopt this view, believing that anyone who can cause phenomena or perform a miracle is one who has more than human powers. The itinerant religious teacher in the Orient, following an immemorial custom, first attracts his audience and then produces phenomena as his credentials. And this procedure is equivalent to saying to his hearers, I am a miracle worker. I have more than human powers, therefore I have more than human knowledge. Consequently, I am worthy to be listened to. It is rather a natural position to take. When the Nazarene went before the Jews, certain of the scribes and of the Pharisees said to him, Master, we would see a sign from thee. They had been accustomed to have teachers along ethical or philosophical lines produce phenomena as evidence of their competency to teach. If the Occident had adopted this most excellent custom, it would have been saved from most of the innumerable teachers of the countless cults by whom it has been perplexed. The real religious leaders of the world have always had knowledge and power above those of their contemporaries, as the results of their evolvement have shown. As examples, Moses, Joshua, Elijah, Elisha, Daniel, Jesus, all Jesus' disciples, Apollonius of Tyana, Simon, the Roman Catholic saints, the Hindu priests, and others, all have produced phenomena now called miracles. In the human heart, there's always the unuttered, if not expressed demand, show us your credentials. The leaders of several modern cults answered this demand by healing illnesses which could not be cured by the medical profession or by the pastors and priests of other churches. These demonstrations of power were not only answers to the cry in the hearts for a sign, but challenged the religious world, saying, in substance, these miracles are our credentials, and our mission is to bring new truths to the world. Come and accept our teachings, which carry with them healing powers. Then the members of the older churches said to their leaders, Jesus and his disciples performed miracles, and some of the members of the new cults produced many of a like kind. How is it that you are unable to manifest the same power? A few sporadic efforts have been made by some Protestant denominations to answer this question by demonstrating along similar lines, but so far with negligible results. The Catholic Church, on the other hand, has been more fortunate in this respect, for it always has justified its mission by its miracles. Those members who performed them were, in due time, canonized, and even their relics are still supposed to carry power. A novena to Saint Joseph often brings results, for which he and the Church both receive due credit, though the occultists would give another explanation of the prayer and answer as that of mental demand and supply. Each system has its own explanation of the cause of phenomena, though the phenomena are identical. But no matter what the various teachers or their followers may say, it must be true that where identical phenomena are produced, the same causes must have been put into operation, and it is illogical to accept the miracles of one church and reject the same kind from another. The Jews had a long line of miracle workers, and when Jesus came and performed his miracles, it was equivalent to saying, I justify my mission with phenomena. And the Jews had to either admit he was a legitimate teacher of a new presentation of truth, or disqualify him by saying he had Beelzebub, and by the prince of devils casteth he out devils. And the Christians learned that lesson well, for when they became powerful and other schools attempted to perform miracles, they also said, we do them through the grace of God, but they through Beelzebub. And so it has been handed down in the Western world that the Orthodox do their works by virtue of God, while the heterodox do theirs through the aid of his antagonist. Simon performed through magic many phenomena as wonderful as did Jesus or his disciples, but Simon was called a black magician. Today, some wonder workers claim to produce their phenomena entirely through the love and presence of God, while they say other schools produce theirs through malicious animal magnetism, which is nothing more or less than Beelzebub under a new name. It is this jealousy among wonder workers which often perverts their judgment, and the investigator of the tenets of a cult cannot safely accept the conclusions of a miracle man solely because he is a wonder worker. for the connection between his words and his works is often remote and illogical. The only safe method, therefore, to pursue is to investigate all similar phenomena, deduce from them a law, and then ascertain if the philosophy of the miracle man is in harmony with that law. One must make due allowance for the play of human imagination in all cases of miracles, and this constitutes the unearned increment of the miracle worker. This is true throughout all history. Joshua, the great miracle worker of the Jews, was said to have made the sun and moon stand still. But every student of occult law or of the laws of astronomy knows that such a phenomena could not be produced by a man, though Joshua could and probably did concentrate certain cosmic forces which gave to his followers the appearance of sunlight and moonlight. Joshua did work miracles upon the rivers of Palestine and among the people, and he even raised the dead. But his claim of making the sun turn backward in its course and the moon to reverse its position in the heavens is absurd, and must be considered one of the many unearned increments of a miracle worker. The Lord, whoever that entity may have been, while talking to Hezekiah through Isaiah, was supposed to have made the sun cast its shadow backward 10 degrees upon the dial, and this was another case of the unearned increment of the agent, because there is no law by which a human or incarnated mind can reach into space and reverse the will of planetary spirits or sun gods, any more than an individual can turn aside the will of the universal. When it was stated that the leaders of the First Church of Christ, scientists of New York City, had by prayer alone changed the carved words on the cornerstone for their church, while it was in transit because Mrs. Eddy did not approve of them, it must be understood that this was another case of unearned increment that should go with other miracle workers and be accredited to the play of the human imagination. What is a miracle? The occultist says it is the production of physical phenomena by the use of occult means. When the children of Israel had crossed the Red Sea and had come to the waters of Marah, they found them bitter, and they could not drink. Moses commanded his followers to cut down a tree and cast it into the waters, and when it was done, a miracle occurred. The bitter waters turned sweet, and the Israelites quenched their thirst. When the city of San Diego, California, was suffering from a polluted water supply, and the inhabitants knew that the very life of the city was in jeopardy, a man went there from San Francisco and gave to a boatman a small bag containing an unknown substance to drag through the water of the reservoir. When this was done, the contents of the bag was dissolved, the polluted water supply of San Diego became pure, and a modern miracle had been performed. In the case of Moses with the waters of Marah, that miracle was produced by the use of knowledge Moses had of the effect that the chemical constituents of the tree would have upon the water. And the miracle at San Diego was performed by the blue vitriol in the bag, killing polluting vegetable life and making the water sweet and palatable. In both cases, what were originally miracles, on being analyzed, became known as chemical action, and one miracle was as great as the other. The realm of the miraculous is constantly contracting, while that of common knowledge is expanding, and what was a miracle at one period of history is a common occurrence at a later time. The occult sciences of medieval days are the mothers of modern sciences, but the precocious children, like most human children, are too prone to underestimate the wisdom of their ancestors. When Jesus and his disciples performed wonderful cures some 2,000 years ago, the people thought they were great teachers because they used unknown forces. The same miracles are performed today by Christian Science, New Thought, or by occult practitioners. These cures have ceased to be miraculous because they are all now within our common experience, our knowledge. An examination of all historical miracles will reveal them as belonging to one of two general classes. First, where the phenomenon is produced by the independent functioning of individual mind, or where there is action of individual mind on mind. Second, where individual mind acts on occult forces. As examples of the functioning of individual minds, there are what are commonly known as voluntary clairvoyance and clairaudience. These occult senses are not in themselves miraculous, but are only supernormal as compared with undeveloped humanity of today. And clairvoyance is a miracle only to those who do not understand its functioning. When Jesus, using these occult senses, saw Nathanael under the fig tree far away, he impressed all those around him with his superhuman power by describing the conversation that occurred and everything that was done by Nathanael. This created in the minds of his hearers a worship of his power. In modern times, a person may also become clairvoyant and see what is done at a distance, and the world is just beginning to understand, in this 20th century, that such a sense is merely a normal human power developed by every ego at a certain point in its evolvement. The second division of the first class mentioned, where mind acts on mind, is itself divisible into two classes, magic and suggestion. Magic is a distinct branch of occultism. It is one of the occult sciences. In another chapter, it is dealt with from its better known but lesser aspect as necromancy. It will be touched upon now as one of the working tools of the miracle man. Of course, it must not be supposed that its modus operandi will be disclosed, since that is one of the secrets of the student of the occult. It is sufficient to say, then, that as a human mind can reach another mind telepathically, so the human mind can act upon intelligence less than human. For example, as man may control a dog, so may he control certain intelligences which, as yet, have not incarnated on this earth. These lesser intelligences are called elementals, and through the control of a trained mind, can be made to produce physical phenomena, such as the carrying of articles from place to place, the precipitation of articles, the disintegration and reintegration of material things. For example, when Jesus was called upon to pay his taxes, he directed Simon to go to sea, cast his hook, take the first fish caught, and in its mouth would be found a piece of money to pay taxes for them both. Jesus either clairvoyantly saw a fish which had swallowed money, not a rare occurrence, and through his will compelled it to take the hook, or knowing where the money was, by the use of elementals, disintegrated, conveyed, and reintegrated it inside the fish. This latter process of disintegrating and reintegrating is frequently seen in these days at spiritist seances, as in the precipitation of flowers, etc. The difference between the amateur and expert worker along these lines is that the precipitated articles of the former last but a short time and then crumble into dust, while those of the expert last their normal lives. This difference is due to the fact that if the interstices between the particles that compose the participated article are unduly extended, they will never again permanently hold their normal relationship to each other. Nor will they hold their relationship if demagnetized in the operation, as the elasticity in the rubber is destroyed by overstretching. So demagnetization and over-distension in precipitation weakens the articles precipitated. But the phenomena cannot be produced without an extension of the interstices, and expert judgment based on numerous experiences is required to accurately adjust the particles. The second subdivision, suggestion, is more familiar to the present age. Suggestion is a thought sent telepathically by one mind to another. No thought which is repeatedly and forcefully sent to another person can fail to reach him. But whether or not it is acted upon is another question. Thought travels unimpeded in the same manner as the etheric waves initiated by a spark from a wireless station. The spark causes a motion of the ether which goes forth onward and outward into space, registering wherever there is a receiving instrument. And wherever there is a receiving negative mind, it catches quickly. A thought sent telepathically into the ether, and even a positive mind must receive a thought sent by a trained mind directly to it. Suggestion plays a most important part in miracle working. In all cases of nervous troubles, in almost all cases of functional troubles, suggestion is an all-powerful instrument in healing. Many wonderful cures of the modern miracle worker are reported. It may have been a tumor that was cured in an instant. All schools cite such instances. But there never was a human suggestion sufficiently powerful to destroy a fibroid tumor, and there is no authenticated case of record, notwithstanding the many claims to that effect. But there have been phantom tumors which have been cured. That is to say, there are certain groups of nerves in the human body that can be worked upon by the ego incarnated within that body in such a manner as to cause all the phenomena of a tumor, and which cannot be distinguished from a real tumor except through clairvoyant vision or an X-ray. Through the power of suggestion, it is possible, in the case of a phantom tumor, to remove the creating thought which produced it, to relax the nerves, and thus dispel it, and these are the cases that are cited in all the modern schools of miracle workers. Many persons have been nervously bedridden. They were obsessed with the idea that they could not move, that their muscles could not function, that their nerves would not act. A strong suggestion sent forth by a trained mind will change the mentality of the person who is suffering and, through that change, bring a reaction to the physical body. All nervous conditions can be successfully changed, and the many cases of this kind cited in the Bible or performed by modern cults can thus be explained. Cures are sometimes effected by a mental change through causes other than suggestion. An interesting case of this kind occurred in Savannah, Georgia in 1886 during the Charleston earthquake. A leading physician's wife, who had been bedridden for 20 years and who had been pronounced incurable by all the prominent nerve specialists of the eastern coast, when she felt the house rocking, bounded out of bed, ran down 2 flights of stairs, dashed across the street, vaulted the fence into the park, and sat on a bench for several hours before she could be persuaded to re-enter her house. The earthquake brought a nervous shock to her, which wrought a complete change in her mentality, causing her body to once more function normally. Suggestion was used by Jesus and his disciples and by all occultists who have preceded him, and it is used by all similar workers today. When Jesus fed the multitude on a few loaves and fishes, the phenomenon did not then come within any of the known laws of nature, occult or otherwise, but it was possible with his power to impress through suggestion upon the minds of the people the belief that they had been fed. The phenomenon was produced, the curiosity of the multitude was satisfied, its hunger appeased, credentials established, and mental suggestion had done the work. When King Edward, then the Prince of Wales, visited India, it is authenticated that there were present several thousand people in one of their great temples, and that a wonder worker of India was brought in who did the well-known basket trick. How was it done? A mind can so dwell upon an image as to cause within its own photosphere that image to appear, and it can be so intensified that everyone looking upon the person producing the picture can see nothing but the picture. The mental image is impressed upon the minds of the spectators with such intensity that it cannot be distinguished from the reality. Moses was not convinced of his mission to the Jews until the Lord God, who came to him in the bush, told him to cast down the stick he held in his hand, and it became a snake. Then he was told to catch the snake by the tail, and when he had done it, the snake was transformed into a rod. In reality, there was no snake, but an image of a snake had been impressed upon Moses' mind, and it is said that Aaron went through a similar experience. Moses and the Egyptian miracle workers, in their contest for supremacy as miracle workers, each produced the same phenomena in the same way. That is to say, they held the image so complete in their minds that any person looking at them could see nothing but the image. Madame Blavatsky duplicated some of these phenomena in New York when she formed the Theosophical Society. A gentleman called upon her who desired to join the society and to become her student. When he was boasting of his ability and bravery, Madame dropped her handkerchief, and as he stooped to pick it up, to all appearances it became a snake. It is needless to say he did not join the society. When Jesus performed his first miracle of turning water into wine, it was done, or could have been done, by his imagining the water as wine. The guests did not know the difference, and were better off with the imagined wine than they would have been with the fermented juice of the grapes, having consumed a quantity of the latter during the earlier part of the supper. The second class of cases is where an individual mind manipulates occult forces. What and where are these forces? The occultists say that around, in, and through the earth are subtle forces of nature which the human mind, by study and concentration, can use as it desires. As the dynamo collects free electricity from the atmosphere by the rapid revolution and friction of its wheel and turns it into light, heat, or power, so the human mind, acting as a dynamo, can attract to itself the free cosmic forces of nature, and drawing them into itself, can then send them forth in any direction and for any purpose it may desire. Many miracles are performed by the mind consciously using these occult forces, but only a trained mind is able to do it. Merely thinking of them in a passive way cannot put them into operation. The mind acts upon these forces as the wind acts upon water. For example, there is a placid lake. Now a little breeze stirs the water slightly. The breeze continues, growing in strength, and there's a ripple on the water. And as the wind increases, the ripples finally become waves. It is in a like manner that the human mind acts upon the cosmic forces through concentration. A little thought scarcely brings any action of the forces, but when concentration is continued for any length of time, they are set into motion, and thus it is that miracles can be performed. When Jesus performed the miracle of the draught of fishes, he probably produced the phenomena by putting into operation these same forces of nature. He pictured near the boat a vortex in the water. This caused a movement there, which attracted the fish to that center. Then he directed his disciples to cast their nets into the vortex, and they made the miraculous catch. When Jesus stilled the storm, he put a cosmic force into action which nullified the opposing force. He drew a higher cosmic force into the vortex where the storm was raging. The higher overcame the lower and dissipated its fury. When Jesus saw Lazarus lying dead, he knew that the vibrations of the atoms composing Lazarus' body had become so slow that the ego could no longer control it with its magnetic force. Jesus, with his tremendous power of concentration, directed the orange cosmic force into the motionless form of Lazarus and commanded him to come forth. Then the conscious ego, who was still near its body, re-entered, and Lazarus was raised from the dead. Within a short time after death, life may be restored by anyone who understands the process of restoration. The electrotherapist, on rare occasions, has resurrected a lifeless body through the use of electricity, which is part of the blue cosmic force. The difference between the occultist method and the electrotherapist is the former does the work through mental processes and the latter by aid of an electric battery. In the course of the evolution of the human race, to triumph over a premature death will cease to be a miracle. It is contrary to the traditions of occultism to teach other than accepted students the use of the destructive forces of nature. Mankind, unfortunately, is still, like a child, destructive in its tendencies, as witness art, science, literature, invention, manufacture, transportation, every line of human endeavor perverted to destructive purposes during the last 5 years. And for this reason, details of how Jesus destroyed the fig tree or how the plagues befell the Egyptians cannot be entered into. But it is sufficient to say that the destructive forces of nature can be put into operation by the human mind in the same manner as can the constructive forces, and both may be used to produce miracles. The immediate purpose of this chapter is to show that all men are using the forces of nature through which miracles are performed. The conscious agent produces them quickly, while he who uses the forces unconsciously does not get results until after many years, and then may be unable to trace the causes from their effects. Most persons drag out unhappy lives due to their environment, totally unconscious that it is self-created, and that it is self-curable through a change of mental attitude toward it. Each person, through the study of psychology and philosophy, can learn the rules that govern creation and make the spiritual, mental, and physical environment desired. And since to think is to create, all men should carefully scrutinize their habits of thought, lest they become Frankensteins and create monsters. A man's character determines the quality of his thoughts, and therefore all the saviors of the world have taught the same ethical principles, hoping thereby to convince man that ethics are not normal platitudes, but are statements of the immutable laws of nature. End chapter. Chapter 3. Vibration. Scientists tell us that vibration is motion and is the underlying cause of everything that exists as a form. But the occultist goes further and says that vibration began with time and was the result of the desire of the universal consciousness for light and for mental and material expression in forms. The scientist says it is atoms, ions, corpuscles, and electrical invisibles that vibrate. He admits that he has never seen one of these infinitesimal divisions of matter, yet he blindly claims that they exist as necessities, since they are the bricks with which the universe is builded, and here he stops for lack of further knowledge along this line. Such students as are not satisfied with such meager information as the scientist has to give may turn to occultist and learn that the atom is the smallest indivisible particle of matter and is a globular, vibrating center of magnetic force. It has two distinct motions, a rotary or generating motion and an elliptical or manifesting motion. It is an infinitesimal portion of the universal consciousness and has a positive and a negative aspect. Its positive aspect is atomic consciousness. Its negative aspect is materiality, and neither aspect can function without the other. By reason of its conscience or positive aspect, its rotary motion is maintained, and by reason of its materiality or negative aspect, its elliptical or manifesting motion is sustained. During the long cosmic nights, while the universal consciousness was unconscious and resting, there was no vibration of atoms in the universe. There was nothing but darkness and silence. Such portions of the universal consciousness as had, in previous cosmic days, been particled into atoms were as vibrationless as was the unparticled portion. All forms had disappeared, and the universal consciousness was a boundless, homogenetic, motionless sea. Before the great consciousness became unconscious, it knew how long the coming cosmic night would last, and as a finite mind, before sinking into repose, knows the hour it must waken, so the universal consciousness knew when its rest would end, and when its mental and material manifestation would again begin. It was in the center of the universe that vibration began on the morning of each cosmic day, and it was and it will be in the center of the universe that vibration ended and will end at the close of this and of every other cosmic day. And such centers as were first created by universal consciousness for it to manifest through were formed at the center of the universe. They were and are the vital organs of the macrocosm and stand in the same relationship to the universal consciousness as do the vital organs of the microcosmic man to his physical form of manifestation. It was at these centers, where the vital organs of the macrocosm were to be placed, that atomic vibration began, as it was at the centers where the vital organs of microcosmic man were to be, that his material, atomic vibrations began before he became a manifesting center of consciousness. When the first great desire for material manifestation began in the universal consciousness, a few atoms at the center of the universe began slowly to rotate, and because of their rotary motions, those atoms became differentiated or separated from the homogeneous mass of unconsciousness of which they had been a part, and became individual vortices of force. They were preparing to manifest the force they were generating. The immediate effect of the rotary motion of the first few atoms was to create a magnetic center of attraction for more atoms to differentiate and to join the vortex already formed, and thus the nucleoid of the macrocosmic heart was created. As an illustration, there is a large block of ice. It is lying smooth and motionless. Suddenly, in the center of that ice, something stirs. Now there appears to be a few infinitesimal grains of ice moving slightly, and now more grains of ice are joining in the movement. As each grain separates from the original mass, it is attracted to and joins that vibrating center. And now that center is changing in appearance. It is no longer ice, but is transformed into a liquid. The ice has melted. The transformation of the solid block of ice into liquid was caused by the increased rotary and elliptical motions of the atoms composing the ice. And the increase of motion, or vibration, was produced by the minute bit of consciousness of each atom responding to its innate desire for a broader manifestation than it could have in its congealed form as ice. When there was no desire for manifestation in a higher form than that of ice, there was neither a rotary nor an elliptical motion perceptible of the atoms composing that mass. But when the desire for a higher manifestation awakened in each atom, then vibration and differentiation began, and the ice evolved into water, the next higher state of consciousness above ice. In the beginning of a cosmic day, before any material forms have been created, there are two grades of atoms, the negative and the positive. The negative grade is that portion of God, universal consciousness, which has never manifested in forms of any kind during any cosmic day. That grade can be called the superabundance of God. It is really the great reserve of the universal consciousness and is sometimes called the undifferentiated part of God. When compared with the positive manifesting grade of atoms, it is as the potter's clay compared with the potter's wares. It is fallow now, but in days to come, it will be gradually brought into manifestation, as it is needed to carry out the plans of deity. But it is the vibrating, manifesting portion of God, universal consciousness, that is now under consideration, and it is composed of atoms and atoms. Some are vibrating more rapidly than others because they belong to a higher grade of consciousness than others. And this is because they have been differentiated for a longer time, have vibrated more, have generated more force, and have used in the composition of a higher form than others. It is the difference between the experienced and inexperienced atoms which makes the distinction. In the beginning of this cosmic day, when the manifesting portion of God desired to again manifest in the forms of men and things, it knew, by its past experience in other days, that the vibration of all its manifesting particles or atoms must be established before any forms could be produced. And it was through the conscious aspect of the highest grade of atoms, at the center of the universe, that rotation or vibration began. And it was from that point, as a center, that the desire emanated, which inspired all other rotating atoms to vibrate higher. As an illustration of the operation of the law of attraction, or of sympathy, as it is sometimes called, the same principle manifests in the human family as contagion of action. For example, should a man start to run on a thoroughfare, almost everyone who saw him would first wonder why he was running, and then the street would be filled with persons running after him. If a person in a crowd begins to laugh and continues laughing for a while, everyone who hears laughs also. If a pathetic scene upon the stage causes a few individuals to weep, the whole audience becomes affected through the operation of the law of attraction or sympathy, and weep or feel like weeping. And as it is with centers of consciousness, so it is with the atoms composing those centers. They vibrate or rotate according to the extent of each one's inherent power, and are in sympathy with all other atoms in their individual center. The creation of a form began with the amalgamation of two or more atoms vibrating at the same common rate. And the growth of a form is due to the continuous attraction of more atoms of a common rate to that nucleus or center. For example, the vortex of atoms that was the beginning of a pine tree began with the amalgamation of a few atoms vibrating at the same rate, and through the magnetic attraction or sympathy emanating from those few atoms as a vortex or nucleus, more atoms of the same rate were attracted. But atoms vibrating at a different rate, such as would combine to compose an elm or a maple tree, were repelled from that center. Through its magnetic attraction, that pine tree center slowly accumulated from earth, air, and water only such atoms as would make it consistent in all its parts, which would make it a pine tree and nothing else. There was another element that entered into the creation of the pine tree. There was a certain amount of concentration of consciousness, as well as the sympathy or attraction of its atoms for each other. There was consciousness enough in each atom composing the pine tree to enable them to reject or repel, as well as to attract and select the right atoms to harmonize with them and to make their center a perfect tree. And this small amount of consciousness grew with the tree's growth because each atom that came into it brought a bit more consciousness to swell the conglomerate whole until it became a pine tree consciousness with its own individual form, odor, and color. But if that pine tree consciousness had not also had the power to repel atoms of a different vibration, instead of bearing pine needles and pine cones, it would have borne leaves and fruit. Forms on the spiritual plane of consciousness are composed of atoms vibrating at a very rapid rate, are the finest texture, and of most exquisite colorings. The beauty and fineness of spiritual forms are due to the fact that they are composed of atoms that have evolved from lower grades of manifestation through many forms of expression to the spiritual plane. All consciousness is intensified through the experiences of expression, and whether it be an atom or a conglomerate mass of atoms forming a sun, a world, a man, or an animal manifestation or expression, is the only means by which consciousness evolves. The atoms on the mental planes are next lower in their rates of vibration than are those upon the spiritual planes, and their colorings are also varied according to their rates of vibration. But each mental form is individualized and manifests according to its development or undevelopment, as the case may be. For example, there are many so-called unusual minds. Unusual because they have mental characteristics peculiar to themselves. They live upon the earth in physical bodies, or they may be excarnated and abide upon some of the subjective planes of consciousness, but they are not in rapport with the mass of consciousness around them. Such minds glorify everything they see. To them, the color blue is bluer than it is to others. The sunshine is more golden, and the moonlight has a charm that others cannot see. Music to them is entrancing, art uplifting, beauty adorable, and love glorifying. These minds are idealistic, and the atoms which compose them vibrate at a more rapid rate than do the atoms that compose the minds who never can determine the true color of a thing, and who like sunshine better than clouds because they feel more comfortable on a sunny day, or who like posters better than pictures because they are funnier. The occultist would describe the idealistic mind as in rapport with the higher cosmic forces, while those minds who do not idealize vibrate with the lower shades of the red, green, and orange cosmic forces. On the material plane, the atoms composing physical or material forms are of a still lower rate of vibration than are those upon the mental plane. But everything from the greatest and most sublime down to the smallest and most insignificant center of consciousness generates and possesses powers that manifest as attraction and repulsion in its individual radius or sphere. And whether a center belongs to the constructive or destructive side of nature depends upon its mode of manifestation. If it manifests more attraction than repulsion, it is more constructive than destructive. But if it manifests more repulsion than attraction, then it is more destructive than constructive. In the morning of this, our cosmic day, before any forms had been created, the universal consciousness started its constructive atoms rotating from left to right, and its destructive atoms rotating from right to left. The reason construction goes from left to right and destruction from right to left has not been revealed by the universal consciousness to finite minds. And it is quite unimportant to finite minds which direction constructive or destructive atoms rotate. But for the sake of the evolvement of forms, it is most important that the constructionist should preponderate in numbers over the destructionist. For if the atoms vibrating destructively should equal or exceed in numbers the atoms of vibrating constructively, then the destruction of all forms in the universe would ensure and evolution would cease. As an illustration of how forms composed of destructive or outlaw atoms disturb constructive centers or forms in cosmos, comets may be considered. These are centers of consciousness composed of atoms that rotate from right to left. They are cosmic centers with no dependable orbits of manifestation, but go rushing about in space for a time, colliding with other centers which come in their way. They are destructive and disorderly, and usually end their careers by plunging into a sun somewhere in the universe, or by exploding and scattering the fragments into space. When those fragments of broken comets are attracted into the atmosphere of a planet, they fall upon it and are buried in the ground, or are swallowed by the sea. These fragments are often called meteors. Among men, in the body politic, there are minds whose atoms rotate from right to left, overturning and destroying happy and prosperous social and financial conditions. Such minds are found among those who hate and kill other men. They are the minds who delight in the downfall of other human beings and who seek to rob others of their possessions, both mental and material. Among men's foods and medicines, there are nourishing, upbuilding things composed of atoms that are constructively rotating from left to right. And there are poisonous, destructive things composed of atoms destructively rotating from right to left. The poisonous, outlaw atoms clog the system, destroy the blood, and break down the tissues. All poisonous things are destructive and are composed of outlaw atoms, and yet there are individuals who deliberately inject into the bodies of other individuals the deadly preparations they know are destructive. Should the body and the mind of a man be magnified until the atoms of which he is composed were to become visible to physical eyes, those atoms would be seen as rotating, revolving globes or balls, and each a separate and distinct center of generating magnetic force. The atoms composing the mind intermingle with the physical atoms, influencing and controlling them by reason of their greater magnetic power. This control of physical atoms by mind atoms is accomplished through the conscious half of the mind atoms coming into contact with the conscious half of the physical atoms. It is here, as it is throughout the universe, that the stronger control the weaker. When a physical body is resting or sleeping, it is not manifesting or expressing force, but its atoms do not stop rotating. Each atom is a miniature dynamo, continuously generating and storing force for future use. This is why sleep is necessary for an exhausted physical body, because when the body is motionless, its atoms are accumulating more force than they are expending. If the magnified physical body should be afflicted with cancer, the diseased part would be seen composed of outlaw atoms rotating in an opposite direction from those which compose the harmonious or healthy tissues. And those destructive cancerous atoms would be rotating at a slower rate and would be of a different color than the harmonious atoms. Should an occultist treat that in harmonious condition, he would send into the patient's body a magnetic stream or army of new constructive atoms rotating so much more rapidly than the cancerous ones that the outlaws would be forced out and away from the body. And his work would be done upon both the mental and the physical planes. He would bring such material remedies into use upon the diseased tissues as would remove the destructive physical atoms, and his remedies would all be constructive. They would strengthen and stimulate the healthy atoms by reinforcing them in number, and the new atoms would take the places vacated by the outlaw or cancerous ones. But if relief were not brought to this physical body and it were left to the destructive power of the cancerous atoms, then the rotary motion of the healthy atoms would gradually become slower, and the patient's whole body would become negative to the destructive outlaw atoms. Positiveness, whether constructive or destructive, overcomes negativeness everywhere in the universe. And the positive, destructive cancerous atoms in this patient's body would gradually overpower and change the rotary motion of the negatively constructive ones until the whole physical body and blood would become inharmonious and cancerous. But if the patient had evolved mentally and physically to a state of positive constructiveness, then his mental atoms would control his physical atoms and, repelling the destructive ones, prevent their entrance among them. Observation and experience have shown that soon or late destruction destroys itself. That a destructive center continues to attract destructive atoms to itself until there comes a revulsion among the destructionists and it is disrupted. And while it is true that destroyers work more rapidly while they work and do more mischief in a shorter time than constructionists can immediately rebuild, yet in the universe, the destructionists are so greatly outnumbered by constructionists that evolvement of forms will continue until the end of this cosmic day. When a constructive, evolving center or form is large, strong, and positive enough to attract and control dissipated, unruly atoms, it can, by its magnetic power, change the rotary motion of those dissipated atoms and force them to rotate from left to right in harmony with its own vibration, and thus the destructive center may be changed to the constructive side of nature. For example, in cosmos, a comet that plunges into a sun is, by the superior magnetic force of the sun, stopped in its career. Its atoms are compelled to vibrate in harmony with those of the sun by reason of the greater number and superior magnetic power of the sun's atoms. And the consciousness of the sun's atoms is so much further evolved than is the consciousness of the comet's atoms that the sun absorbs the comet without shock or injury to itself. The continuation or life of a center depends upon its magnetic power to hold its atoms together, to keep them vibrating in harmony, and also to continuously attract new atoms. And an individual mind must continually gain in knowledge and power of concentration or become stagnant, for there is no center in the universe that is not changing for better or worse during a period of evolutionary activity. Everything must evolve or devolve. What men call life is evolution. What men call death is dissolution. When the atoms composing a man's physical body have ceased to vibrate at a rate rapid enough for the mental or higher consciousness to hold them together as a center of physical force, the man has ceased to manifest upon the material plane, and his physical atoms must be dispersed. The dispersed physical atoms will again be attracted to other material centers, while the same magnetic mind will create another material body by attracting other atoms of a higher rate of vibration into its matrix. And when this cosmic day is done, and this period of time has ended, the manifestation of God, universal consciousness, will again become vibrationless. The atoms composing all centers in the universe will cease to rotate and will remain motionless where they once manifested. And it shall then come to pass that, in the place where the tree falleth, there it shall be. And evolution will rest until the dawn of another cosmic day. Meet me at the next video where the author's going to introduce some concepts of cosmic evolution, Moses the magician, and soul slavery. Please do hit the like button, share, and subscribe.